Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rosa Cabrera, director of the Rafael Cintron Ortiz Latino Cultural Center, known as the LCC. Thank you for joining us in this virtual space for another season of Climates of Inequality, a project in collaboration with the Humanities Action Lab since 2018. That also includes a traveling exhibition. We are now on the sixth season of this Climates of Inequality presentation, and I would like to invite you to access the previous talks through the link on the chat. I think someone is going to be putting where you can access the previous videos. This is the first of three presentations scheduled for this semester, highlighting local and national leaders working on environmental and climate justice. Guest speakers have been sharing frameworks and solutions to address the disproportionate impacts of climate change and environmental harms inflicted on historically and currently excluded communities, including Black, Brown, Indigenous, undocumented, disabled, queer, and trans. The presentation today will focus on a campaign led by Chicago Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines, calling for the release of Filipino-American youth organizer Chantal Anicoche, who was captured by the Philippines Armed Force on January of this year, while joining indigenous land defenders who are resisting corporate development and environmental destruction in Mindoro, Philippines. We will learn how climate activists in the Philippines and US are facing similar repressions and how international solidarity is essential to building a sustainable and equitable world. Before I introduce our guest speakers, a few shout-out of gratitude are in order. We can start with community partners, Alianza Americas and Little Village Environmental Justice Organization, El Bejo, for their continuous collaboration over the past 6 years in this project. Our funders, the Humanities Action Lab and Sustainability at UIC, our co-sponsors, Latin American and Latino Studies, Freshwater Lab, Great Cities Institute, Las Ganas Project, and Museums and Exhibition Study. And finally, our LCC interns, Cassie Campos and Jocelyn Gamarra, who will be in a short conversation with our two guest speakers after the presentation. So we are very excited to have with us today Rachel Lawrence Foster as our guest speaker. Rachel is a community organizer with the Chicago Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines, where she stands in solidarity with the grassroots movement for genuine democracy and sovereignty in the Philippines, and advances the calls for indigenous rights and environmental justice from Chicago. And collaborating in this presentation with Rachel is a student, Esther. Welcome to our program, Rachel and Esther. The floor is yours.
Great. Thank you guys so much for having us. I really appreciate it. We're so excited to share with you this presentation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Yeah. All right. How is that looking for everyone? All good? Okay. Thanks so much. Yes. So this is our presentation where we're talking about standing in solidarity with the people's struggle for climate justice in the Philippines. And this is our agenda for today. We're going to talk a little bit about who we are, give an overview of the Philippine environmental issues, and then we're going to kind of dive into Mindoro as a case study in resource exploitation, indigenous struggle, and repression of activists. And then we're also going to kind of look into the conditions that allow for this violence and give some analysis of how we can change them. And then we will finish up with our calls to action and discussion. So I will go ahead and hand off to Esther.
Hello. So who are we? What is CCHRP? CCHRP is the Chicago Committee for Human Rights in the Philippines. We are a grassroots organization advocating for human rights in the Philippines. And we are a solidarity org in support of national democracy. We're a subchapter of ICHRP, and we support the national democratic movement in the Philippines. We also work alongside other orgs like Anak Bayan here at UIC and Malaya. So to begin, I would love to get like a temperature check. If people can answer questions in the chat. Why should we learn about environmental justice around the world? And if you want to answer the second one, environmental issues don't affect people equally. What are some examples of this? Um, I think you guys can answer in the chat. Um, yeah, build healthy community. Yes. Um, our struggles are interconnected. Yes, exactly. Um, to raise awareness. That is another good one. Yeah. Um, I guess I can move on. Climate change is global. You can't fix it with one country only. Exactly. Um, let's see. So part of our what we want to highlight and why we want to look at these issues or climate change from an international perspective is because the people in other nations which are oppressed contain a vast majority of the world's uh, remaining ecosystems and key resources. Um, these regions are also most affected by climate change, but least responsible. Um, Meaning that like, yeah, the solutions to climate change um, needs to be global. This is what some people were saying in the chat that you can't fix it in just one country. You can't just fix it in America because then other countries still deal with a lot of these different issues. And then global solidarity lifts us all up. It's the way that we can fight these issues together and continue to work towards um, and really healing our planet. Yeah. So knowing this, let's take a look at the Philippines. The Philippines is ecologically important. There's a lot of ecosystems that are threatened for the abundant resources and for development. They're home to pristine ecosystems, old growth forests, which act as important carbon skins, meaning they help reduce CO2 or hold CO2 from the atmosphere. And then it's home to very biodiverse ecosystems. You can see some of the lovely animals and wildlife in the Philippines that are affected by climate change. Um, the Philippines is one of the countries most affected by climate change. We see a lot of flooding, chronic flooding. We'll talk a lot about flooding and typhoons in the Philippines. But yeah, it's very, very important. So when it comes to the Philippines is very rich in large mineral deposits like gold, nickel, silver, and others. It's very rich in fertile land for lodging and farming, and very rich in bodies of water full of fish that can be used, but the people in the Philippines are very poor. The Filipino people do not see any of this wealth. They suffer under extreme poverty and neglect and can't afford to eat. They're vulnerable to super typhoons and flooding and susceptible to large scale displacement. So why is this the case? Why is all these resources, everything is there, but people don't get any of it, and the people are starving. When we look at it, um, we see that the history of colonization by Spain, Japan, and the U.S., ongoing colonial theft by the U.S., really contributes to why the resources aren't being used in the Philippines. Um, we also see that landlessness is a big factor of this. 70% of the population are farmers who could be displaced at any time. The farmers don't get to use their own harvests for themselves. They have to other companies in the government take the harvests and ship them away so that a lot of farmers don't see a lot of what they cultivate. We also see that government corruption really affects climate because the government officials enrich themselves through their station instead of trying to make the conditions better for the people of the Philippines. These three root problems make the chaos of climate change even more brutal. Um, oh, uh, here's a brief timeline of colonization. We have our pre-colonial time, then the Spanish colonized the Philippines in 1521. Then the US obtained the Philippines from the Spanish after the Mexican-American War. Then during World War II, there was a Japanese occupation, and then after World War II, the Philippines was declared independence. But like a lot of other nations like a lot of other nations who lost the war, the US had a big say in how Reconstruction and the policies and where the country led. They had a lot of influence on the Philippines, and they still have a lot of influence today, as we will see. So let's look at government corruption a little deeper. Climate change is causing typhoons to worsen. Philippines has averaged 20 typhoons per year. It's a lot of typhoons. Destruction of typhoons is avoidable if government used funds set aside for flood control projects. If they used it to actually establish flood control projects, because billions of pesos have been stolen from the projects, leaving the budget empty and protection non-existent. Basically, they create projects that they say are are made for flood prevention, but they don't actually complete any of them, or some of them don't even exist. And a lot of that money is not we don't really see where it goes, and that we look deeper and see that they go into the hands and the pockets of people in power. Ongoing colonial exploitation, violent resource extraction via foreign companies. So foreign companies frequently use land grabbing as a way to displace people for their own greed. Filipino people work for them. People who work for them are subjected to extremely unsafe working conditions. Quarrying and open pit mining can cause deadly landslides. So again, this history of resource extraction we see in colonization across the globe is still happening today, still displacing many Filipino people in the Philippines today and causing a lot of dangerous conditions for workers and people who are surrounding the area. And then lastly, landlessness. Again, we said 70% of the population are farmers who don't own their own land. Increasingly violent typhoons raising oceans, landslides caused by violent extraction. So because of the extraction, thousands of people are displaced in a single natural disaster event, a single typhoon. Because the climate crisis is worsening, the rate of displacement are increasing. Military violence from the AFP in response to resistance or defense of corporate land grabbing also forces people to leave their homes. So the military also is used to prevent any change from happening, any ghost project or any people who were trying to make the conditions better. Is there anything else?
I think
also important to note that these people, like 70% of them can be displaced at any time.
Yeah, yeah. 70% of these people can be displaced at any time. So now that we've looked at these three problems, and these three aspects, let's take a look at a more specific example in Mindoro. I'm going to pass it off to Rachel for this.
Thank you, Esther. Yes. So yeah, let's look at Mindoro. This is Mindoro, the Philippines. You can see where it's located on the map here. The Philippines is actually made up of 7,000, like over 7,000 islands. And there's actually lots of different indigenous groups that reside in the Philippines. It's Mindoro is known, or it's the seventh largest island in the Philippines, and it is known for its wealth of natural resources, including gold, watersheds, and fertile land for agriculture. And due to its abundance of resources, large corporations like Peaceland Corporation and the Armed Forces of the Philippines have attempted to forcibly evict the Manyan-Eraya indigenous peoples from their ancestral land through fencing off land, food blockades, and extreme violence. So fencing off land, that's an example of like the land grabbing we were talking about earlier. Food blockades that can also be referred to as like hamleting, where the military will like surround an area and keep any supplies from getting in and out as a way to weaken these people and force them into just submitting to, whether it's the corporate interests or the military's interests, they typically are one and the same. Unfortunately, there was actually a woman from this tribe who, because she had a combination of several different health issues, she actually died during this. It's just really important to highlight these sort of like different methods so that we can talk about the brutality that's being employed by the military. So these are the Manyan-Eraya people. They are one of 8 indigenous groups that are in Mindoro. You can see that there's like traditional weaving here as a part of like their culture, as well as like something called the candle dance. That's actually like a common Filipino tradition that originated here from the Manyan-Eraya people. And also, these people, it's important to note that these people actually aren't really doing anything to be aggressive towards the military or these corporations. It's simply their existence and the land that they're on that causes this military violence to occur. Because later in these slides, we will talk about some of the repression that activists face. But it's also important to highlight the fact that these people, they're purely just trying to exist and live out the dignity of their lives, are being threatened and experiencing really crazy violence as a result. So we can talk about the recent military escalation that occurred earlier this year. On January 1st of this year, the Armed Forces of the Philippines continued to escalate the violence inflicted on the Manyan-Eraya community by invading and attacking the barangay Cabacao on an alleged defense operation. It was there that Filipino-American activist Chantal Anicoche was disappeared. Alongside her disappearance, the armed forces dropped no less than 12 aerial bombs, resulting in the death of 3 indigenous children, 2 student researchers, the injury of a mother, and the displacement of 188 families. So seeing the context from before of how a single event, whether it's natural disaster or to do with military aggression, it can displace hundreds to thousands of people at a time, really making people's lives filled with chaos. And it's just like incredibly horrible to see. So this is the latest in a years-long series of human rights violations and violence by the Philippine government against the Manyan-Eraya communities. In between January and November of 2025, there were 16,733 victims of human rights violations on this island of Mindoro. So who is Chantal Anicoche? So Chantal Anicoche is a 24-year-old educator and community leader who was a former undergrad student and leader at the University of Maryland. She's a Filipino-American student, she's the leader at the University of Maryland Filipino-American Student Association. And she was there volunteering to provide aid and relief to the Manyang Eraya indigenous people in Abra de Ilog, Occidental Mindoro. Like most other indigenous peoples in the Philippines, the Manyang have been chronically impacted by environmental disasters and poverty. So basically, Chantal Anicoche, she is someone who's Filipino. She's an advocate for these people here in the Philippines. And she was disappeared and was later found to be in the hands of the armed forces of the Philippines. And it's really a question of like, when people who come from immigrant families or who are immigrants want to return home and advocate for the people that are part of their community, it's like really like, what is her crime here? Why would she be in the hands of the armed forces of the Philippines? Like, why would you hold her? And these are some really important questions to ask because like we know that, there is no crime here and that people who immigrate should have a right to return home safely and to even just like have the ability to learn more about all the different peoples that inhabit their country of origin, as well as advocate for them as well. So thankfully, so the calls to service Chantal Anicoche have actually been answered and she has been surfaced and she has safely returned home. I think, human rights organizations in the Philippines, the US, and all over the world launched this Surface Chantal as well as Defend Mindoro campaign. So on January 8th, the 203rd Infantry Brigade released videos showing Chantal. And while this video demonstrates that the mass campaign is working, and like the people that we are targeting and pressuring to release her are responding, the details of this video remain questionable. The military claims to have found her 8 days after the bombing, and despite claiming that she was supposedly on only 500 meters from the site of the attack, she looks terrified and she looks under duress throughout the video. And thanks to international calls for her safe release, Chantal Anicoche has returned home, but this form of repression isn't new and is also likely to continue. So, there's actually a very typical pattern of state repression in the Philippines. The Philippines is one of the deadliest countries in Asia for environmental defenders for 10 years in a row. There were 186 killings of environmental defenders, many of them who are indigenous, in 2016 to 2020. And indigenous communities resisting corporate land grabs are heavily militarized and even bombed. It's also important to point out here that indigenous communities that aren't resisting and, like I said before, are just existing on their ancestral lands are also experiencing violence as well, simply because they are on land that corporations want. And activists are targeted and labeled as quote unquote terrorists by the Philippine police and military. And on the top here, you'll see another case of two environmental defenders who were captured and released due to another international campaign of pressure to surface them. They were abducted by the military in 2023. They suffered through 8 days of interrogations, threats of violence and murder before the movement pressured them to be surfaced. So there's also a lot of campaigns here to defend environmental defenders, these people who are really at the front lines of defending the sensitive ecosystems and indigenous people. So let's talk about NTF-LCAC. NTF-LCAC is the National Task Force to End Local Communist Armed conflict. So basically, this was formed in 2018, so fairly recently. It uses the whole of nation approach, which combines the use of community programs with military action. So the armed forces of the Philippines and the Philippine National Police are also used in conjunction with other parts of the government meant for assisting people, or maybe not even assisting people. Maybe it's a body of the government that's about infrastructure or something. But they use it to kind of disperse these collective people power that form and yeah, it's just basically like counterinsurgency to work against activists and to persecute them. They really exist to squash dissent and meet people's right to resistance with violence, harassment, threats, and surveillance. And it's also important to note that the US government, just as, we send a lot of military aid to different countries, the Philippines is a recipient of that aid. And that aid goes to the armed forces of the Philippines and the Philippine National Police. And they are basically helping fund this sort of like terror tagging that happens in the Philippines. So the US and the Philippines have a very lopsided relationship. As you can imagine, like the US really dominates over the Philippines. And we can see that economically when we talk about, the presence of national companies that are, a lot of them are American, but they can be a lot of, different countries from the global north that are present in the Philippines, and they're there to take resources. But it's also too important to note the military aspect of this lopsided relationship. The fact that, the Philippines is the largest recipient of US military aid in the Indo-Pacific. It also doubles as there's like doubling of US military bases in the Philippines under Marcos to a total of 9 in 2024. This number is also expected to increase. 9 military bases is also what we know to be the military bases that are there, but I think the actual number is much higher. And, as you continue to militarize and up the amount of like sort of sophisticated weaponry that's in the Philippines, you can see here that last year the US approved the 5.5 billion jet sale to the Philippines. And these are used to surveil China. These are used to surveil their own people. They also sold a lot of things like bombs and things like that to the Philippines. So this really just worsens the regional tensions with China, as well as increases the violence towards the Philippines' own people. And yeah, there's human rights abuses in and around the US military bases. There's like human trafficking around the US military bases in the Philippines. There's also labor exploitation that's occurring there. So all around, this presence of the US military in the Philippines is really detrimental to the health of the Filipino people. But you can also see how even just our investment in the Philippines military is also violent to them as well. And you can really see this in what's called the Balikatan War Games. This is an annual joint military exercise between the Philippines and the US occurring every April where the US and the Philippines use live ammunition, bombs, and missiles. And this can be really destructive to people's lives. People, when they clear land to practice these war games, they clear land using bombs as well, and that has like actually end up in killing like the death of people. And it's also incredibly violent towards like all of these sensitive ecosystems that we mentioned as well. Another aspect of this is that there are like people who maybe are like fisher folk. And, as we talked about earlier, the Philippines is made up of 7,000 islands. So you can see how people could be reliant on the sea for eating, right? Just like not just feeding themselves, but feeding communities since they are, a fisher, like that's their livelihood. And when people are sort of like doing these military exercises in the waters nearby, it makes it so that these people can't even fish. So it destroys livelihoods. And these war games are not just an exchange of weaponry trading, but it's also, sharing counterinsurgency strategies, surveillance methods, things like that. Surveillance technology, facial recognition, these sorts of things, to continue to repress the people. And, in the US, we know that the US is one of the largest contributors to climate change. We continuously invest in military and police instead of addressing climate change, or education, or jobs, or even migrant support that make up such an important part of our community. And yeah, the US military is a leading cause of climate change. You can see here from this article, the US military is a bigger polluter than as many as 140 countries. Shrinking this war machine is an absolute must. And this is also just a recent development, talking about some of the economic deals that are happening between the US and the Philippines, on the mining of critical minerals. You can see here, this is the deal that they made recently. It's called a Memorandum of Understanding regarding critical minerals, and it was recently signed jointly. And they said it's to create momentum for collaboration to secure these critical components vital to technological innovation, economic strength, and national security. But as we look back and we see the story of what's going on in Mindoro and what is typical for like these sorts of violent extraction processes, we know that this is just going to result in an increase in human rights abuses, whether that is labor exploitation, whether that's the hamleting that the Mangan Iraya are experiencing. And we know that it's not just happening in Mindoro, right? So it's really important for us to raise these things and to really strongly oppose these things when they occur, because we know that we don't want to be a part of these like violent processes. So yeah, this will allow for more resource exploitation. Yeah, and the companies that are continuing to pillage the Philippines of their natural wealth. But of course, the fight continues. We, like the environmental defenders, are going to continue their advocacy in the Philippines despite these terrifying threats, and also continues a long tradition of Philippine resistance, because the Philippines has resisted colonial rule for hundreds of years, despite whatever may pass. And it's so important for us to join our voices to theirs. So yeah, we absolutely have a role here in the US in solidarity. We have a duty to speak out against the actions and policies of the US government that are repressing the Filipino people, as well as destroying the planet. And we must demand that our tax dollars don't go to support human rights violations and instead go towards services and addressing the climate crisis. The thing that I always think about is like, when I'm hard at work, it's like, do I want 20% of this going to hurt more people? And it's like, absolutely not, and we have such a important role to play in holding our government accountable on that. And yeah, our like global warming is international. It's not just affecting the US and the Philippines, it's affecting the entire world. So if our solutions to global warming have to be international, then our resistance has to be too. And in the US, as we've been seeing like increasing ICE activity, we have also been seeing that they're targeting people who are speaking out against ICE or who are also community leaders. So we're also experiencing increasing repression of activists, and persecution of migrants. And what happens abroad will happen here. We're all under the same umbrella of exploitation, whether that's here or in the Philippines. So also, our solidarity with one another is crucial now more than ever. So yeah, I'm going to hand off to Aster for our calls to action.
Yes. Yeah, calls to action today. Yeah, there's so many ways to get involved, even if it's not with CCHRP, but what we want is, or today we have an action at the Philippine consulate at 6 p.m. If anyone is available to come down, like show up. It's the People Power 40th anniversary, which was a movement in the Philippines that kicked out the dictator Marcos, who established martial law in the Philippines. So we're commemorating that, but also raising the issues that we just talked about here today, and resisting also the consulate, which we didn't talk about here, but if you go, you'll hear a lot about. Then you can also get involved by joining CCHRP or another org. If you're interested, we hold info sessions if you want to know more about what we do. You can also donate to CCHRP with this link and follow us on Instagram. And we're going to be collaborating with other organizations and see what other events are going on so that you can get involved. Yeah.
Yes, thank you all so much for listening to our presentation. I hope that you learned something today. Also just, yeah, like curious about what people are taking away or, of course, we would love to collaborate with the LCC again. It's always such a wonderful experience, working with you all. So yeah.
Hi.
I think we're going to let Jocelyn now and Cassie pose some question to Rachel and Esther. And then anyone else who wants to make some comments, but also pose some questions, you can do that on the chat, or I'm not sure if Natalie, there might
Yeah,
also be questions in the.
I think, can folks hear me, but I might be frozen?
We can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I'm having some difficulties in our shared space today. But yeah, thank you for that great presentation, Rachel and Aster. It's great to see some familiar and non-familiar faces in our virtual e-space. Let me know if at any point you're unable to hear me. But like Rosa gave us a really brief little introduction into our Q&A. My name is Nat. I am the public program coordinator here at the Latino Cultural Center, and I'll be help facilitating our little post-discussion Q&A, which will be started off by two of our Latino Cultural Center student interns, Jocelyn and Kathy. Did either of you want to start? I know that Rosa picked on Jocelyn, so I don't know if we want to continue that and then hand it over to Kathy afterwards.
Thank you so much, Nat, and thank you, Rachel and Aster, for your lovely presentation. That was super informative. I kind of just want to ask you a question about, like that international solidarity that you picked up on at the end. So I guess my question is, what would you say to those individuals who don't recognize the importance of international solidarity and kind of connecting it to state repression and what we're seeing here at home in the US? Like, how can you recognize the connection between what's happening in the Philippines and what's happening here?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question because, of course, I think there are a lot of people who maybe don't agree with international solidarity. And I think basically what I would say to that is, and as an example of the US and the Philippines, like the military strategies that they're using are basically the same. Like they're learning, the Philippines is learning from us how to violently repress their people. And, that's been a part of their history from the US, at least for 100 years. So I think that it's really important to connect those things and say, what you do to someone across the ocean absolutely has an impact on me. And, there's like this really important quote, and I forget who said it, but it's like what you allow abroad will occur at home. And talking about like, I think it's like the imperial boomerang that, these things have a way of coming back around to affect us as well. So having this idea of like, well, has nothing to do with me is never true. But of course, even if it didn't, it's like we should care about our neighbors, whether they're the people being harassed and disappeared by ICE, or if they're the people who are across the ocean. Yeah, and also I think Astor wanted to add. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Sums it up very well.
I also just saw in the chat that, or I'm sorry, I didn't, how am I interrupting?
No, it's totally fine. So, thank you for the great response and great questions. We're gonna have one more question come in from one of our student interns, Kathy, and then after that, I'm gonna transition over into our Q&A, and some other questions that we have for you both. But folks, also feel free to continue adding questions into the chat, if you're able to.
Yeah, hi, my name is Kathy. I just want to say thank you, Rachel and Aster, for this very informative presentation. I really liked how you guys centered climate change and the deep effects on the locals with how it is perpetuated by US intervention. I also think it's really powerful when you say that what happens abroad will happen here. So my question is, how do you responsibly advocate for those in other nations without decensoring their voices?
That's a really good question. I think that's something that I have like thought about a lot, being a part of CCHRP for, I mean, I guess about 2.5 years is, I think it's really important for people who are in solidarity to work as an amplifier for those voices and, be louder than the people who are trying to oppress those people, but never be louder than those you're trying to advocate for. I think that's the most important thing. And of course, that can be really easier said than done because I think we are seeing a lot of sort of troubleshooting happening in the activist world right now as people are under so much pressure to continue the solidarity, but do it in a way that is that is effective, right? And I think one of the ways that we do that in Chicago here is that we stand in solidarity with the National Democratic Movement. There's a lot of other Filipino organizations here in Chicago that we are, part of our community. Like Malaya, we talk about Anak Bayan, talk about maybe the National Alliance for Filipino Concerns. So that's one way we stand in solidarity with Filipino people here in Chicago. But another way that we do that is also to advocate for Filipino migrants here in Chicago. I think something that wasn't present in my presentation today was our contribution to Tengo Migrante, which means defend migrants in Tagalog. And we basically use this campaign or actually this movement to advocate for Filipinos in detention in the Midwest. And it's also an international movement with chapters in the Philippines, chapters in the US and other areas as well. So wherever there are Filipinos, we want to support them.
Yeah, also to go off the question, one of the best ways to not overpower voices is to listen to those voices and to work with those voices. Like Rachel was saying, we work with Anak Bayan and a bunch of other Filipino organizations, which we support their campaigns. We also we ask, we listen to what is in the need of the people in the Philippines to take. And we have immersion trips where we go to the Philippines to meet the locals, see what's going on there, to figure out what issues are affecting them the most. And again, we work with so many wonderful activists who are Filipino.
Yes. Right.
Thank you for those great responses, and also thank you for those great questions by two of our lovely interns. Now I'm going to be transitioning over into our Q&A slash our webinar chat. So if you added a question, we're going to spend about the next 8 minutes or so and possibly have the opportunity to answer them. And the first question I'm going to start with comes from Rosa, who asks, and I'm also going to put it in the chat to everyone again, because a few folks privately messaged me their question. But says, can you share some specific international strategies used to put pressure in the release of Chantal Anicoche? And I'll also put it in the chat as well, so folks are able to read it. So I'll give you a second, but whenever either or both of you would like to respond to this question.
Yeah, I think the campaign to release Chantal basically was sort of like using like mobilizing all of the different Filipino organizations across the US to really like raise those issues and to be like to pressure the Philippine government to respond, which sometimes that can be contacting the consulate, that can be just really publicly like making it as public and loud as possible through all of our different organizations. Because like we said, like we're an international like movement. And because of that, like when there comes like an urgent call like this, where we're concerned that someone is like, being held, possibly being tortured or pressured or something like that. It's really crucial that we all come together to have those like sort of like calls. And as far as the specifics, I think that it was really not just mobilizing all the different Filipino organizations, but as well as like people who may be like sort of like different sectors who are really like connected to the Filipino movement. Like for instance, maybe like I think teachers and everything, people of different vocations. Yeah. Sorry, I hope that answers your question, but I think I struggled with it because I wasn't a part of that particular campaign, and like what exactly made it successful. So I hope I answered your question. Okay.
Yeah, some of the specifics are like petitioning wherever you are, your local government, either here in the US or abroad, to put pressure on the Philippines, as well as just like getting the word out there, talking to Filipinos that you know, spreading. A lot of it is educating. Like this is happening. Like a lot of people don't realize that this is happening, and how similar it is to like ICE here in Chicago. And that's just another really big strategy that we have.
Yes. Also, that just jogged my memory. It was also the pressuring of certain like legislative targets. So people that maybe have like representatives of Congress or senators or things like that who have like international relations or are sort of a part of those initiatives, really like targeting them, doing phone barrages and things like that to make sure that these issues are raised. Yeah. So yes, I hope that answers your question.
Thank you so much for that. Yeah, any response you have, right, is all about getting us to think more critically about a lot of these issues. And so another question that I'm going to pull from our webinar chat comes from Jorge, who asks, what are some of the creative ways that indigenous peoples resist in the Philippines, or creative ways that they organize themselves to make decisions or push back against the violence? I'm also going to copy and paste it back into the chat for everyone to see just one more time. Same thing, whenever either of you all feel ready, or both of you all feel ready to respond to this question.
Yeah, I think one creative way that is specific to like how indigenous people in the Philippines resist is that, when a company will like land grab, they kind of grab it back and they will end up like planting or cultivating the land in response, and that drastically increases their access to food. So yeah, it's basically just like them being like, no, you can't have it. I'm just gonna keep continuing to use it. And like that's a really important way for indigenous people to resist. But of course, it's also important to cultivate like the support for them as well, just so that they're also supported in their struggles. Yeah, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I don't know about indigenous community specifically. I think you covered it pretty well, but people staying on land, but they are supported by a bunch of different great. I think what I love about looking at the Philippines is a case study of like activism, because there's been so much activism, is how broad and how they grab so many different they like target so many different communities like labor unions and student organizations, and like finding the ways to reach people to advocate for the different issues that are affecting different people. So like finding the commonality between the labor, the like I think a good example was like the universities in the Philippines. The staff, the like janitors, the in this might be, I don't know if this is true, but this is a good example. Like the janitors who work in the schools experience the same kind of like low pay. So they organize with the students, and together these two groups of people together create a lot more disruption and are a lot louder than just the janitors like protesting and striking, or just the students like walking out. Like it's finding the commonality to work together amongst unions, students, religious groups, and I think the Philippines does that really well.
Yeah.
Great, thank you for those lovely responses. We are in our final minute of our virtual public program, but I'm actually going to pass it back to Jocelyn and Kathy to see if they have any final comments or even a final question in our last minute or two here with all of us.
So I guess if you could just briefly talk about like how did you get involved in the organization and like a general call to action, like if anyone would like to join the movement, what folks would need to do to get more involved in what you guys are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I got involved with CCHRP through an event that they did about political prisoners, and we actually were able to like directly send money to political prisoners in the Philippines. And those are people who are like, activists who are still being held by the military. And I think I just felt so connected to people who are so far away, especially because we were also able to like send letters to them as well. So I just love the aspect of CCHRP that is so directly connected to the people in the Philippines who need it the most, and to really like bring that solidarity that they desperately need. Yeah, and our calls to action are to, come to the Philippine consulate today if you can, and to help us commemorate this like really historic People's Power movement. Join CCHRP if you're interested in also doing solidarity work. We have the bit.ly here, as well as like donation. You can follow us on Instagram, or if you see the commonalities between our org and maybe another area that we should be collaborating with, we would love to collaborate as well. So yeah, just reach out to us. Or yeah, if you're comfortable with us reaching out to you, we can do that too.
Thank you so much for that. Thank you. Let's give a virtual round of applause both to Rachel and Aster, and on behalf of CCHRP for joining us for our first of 3 climate of inequality programs that we'll be hosting this semester. Also, thank you to our student interns who helped us out today, and then of course everyone who joined us in the virtual space today.